Good afternoon, everybody. A very warm welcome, literally a warm welcome to this webinar about the Nuffield Early Language Intervention. My name is Josh Hillman. I'm the Director of Education at the Nuffield Foundation. We are a charitable foundation that funds research, development and innovation across education, welfare and justice. And this is the second in a series of webinars that we have organised. We had one just before half term that was more aimed at local authority advisors and speech and language therapists. This one's more aimed at people from schools, trusts, federations. And so that's who you are. I think we've got nearly 600 from across all corners of the country, no doubt with children departing, hopefully into the sunshine across all parts of the country, which is something we would never have even begun to be able to achieve if this had been in person. So this is a real fantastic opportunity. I wish I could see everybody, but we've had to opt for the version of Zoom where you're not postage stamps on the screen. They would have been too tiny. So you're not visible or audible during the webinar, and you'll just have to put up with the group of us that are here that you can currently see. I should say that we have closed captions in English, which you can access by following the link in chat, which will be put up. And for, yeah, that sort of covers that aspect. Now, just by way of introduction, for some time, early years education has been a big theme for Nuffield Foundation. In particular, we've highlighted the very central role that oral language plays in early childhood. It facilitates social and emotional development. It provides the building blocks for the later development of literacy skills. It enables a smooth transition to the primary classroom, and it builds on children's capacity to benefit from all aspects of school life, as you will all recognise. And these foundations are not laid equally. The gaps in language skills and vocabulary between children from lower and higher income families, on average, of course, are already apparent at 18 months old. And by the time they start school, children from the poorest fifth of families are 19 months behind those from the richest fifth in terms of their vocabulary. Now, disparities like these have persistent effects throughout education and even into employment. Enter COVID-19 and the abrupt and prolonged disruption to the opportunities for preschool children to develop their language skills. We saw early years education providers being closed and restricted in what they could offer. And some families have since been reluctant for their children to return to or take up places in nursery schools. The latest DFE data shows attendance in early years settings still lower than usual at 78%. Meanwhile, young children's lives were for a long period, and to some extent a little bit is still remaining in these last few weeks, largely home-based. They've missed many of the informal ways in which language is developed. There were periods in which they couldn't socialise with wider family and friends. They were not able to absorb ambient language in shops, in buses, playgrounds. They weren't able to go to libraries, museums, have days out. Now, the research that Nuffield funded during the pandemic has shown that young children in lower income families were hit the hardest. They had fewer educational resources or developmental activities in the home. There were lower rates of engagement with parents who were struggling with poverty, trying to juggle work and caring responsibilities in the face of the complexities of the pandemic. And so the development of all children entering reception classes in the current school year and next school year, and particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds, has been impoverished by these disruptions and the more limited exposure to language in both formal and informal settings. And we know from research that teachers are particularly worried about this. A report from the EF showed that 96% of schools surveyed last autumn term were concerned about the impact of the pandemic on children's language and communication skills. And since then, we've had another lockdown, continued restrictions on socialising. So this isn't a problem that's just restricted to one cohort of school starters. Now, I've been talking about large-scale research. If I could see all the tiny postage stamps, I'm sure I'd be seeing lots of nodding heads from those who are working on the ground in schools. And this is where the Nuffield Early Language Intervention comes in. It was designed on the basis of scientific research by a team of developmental psychologists led by Professors Margaret Snowling and Charles Hume, who are now at the University of Oxford. It was refined through scaled-up trials over the past decade. The program's been shown to be highly effective. 3 months average progress for pupils, potentially more for poorer children, and the EF's highest security padlock for robustness of findings. Program focuses on vocabulary knowledge, narrative skills and active listening, and it's particularly targeted at those with relatively poor oral language skills. As many here know, it's easily delivered by teaching assistants. In recognition of the value of NELI, the DFE has made it a core part of the recovery programme to support disadvantaged children who are falling behind before they've even started school. This year, reception pupils in 6,672 state-funded schools across England are benefiting from the programme. And the next short presentation will cover the rationale and the evidence behind the programme and the experience of this rollout for all those schools. Sarah Tillotson, who's the programme manager at the EEF, who's leading on early years, language and literacy, will cover that aspect of it. Now, the DFE, importantly, has recently announced additional funding to expand the rollout to all interested schools for next school year, 2021 to 2022. And all resources and full training for teaching assistants will be provided for free, and schools will be able to register online at www.teachneli.org. I'm going to keep saying that until people memorize it. And that's opportunities open between now and the end of July this year. Programs delivered by a consortium of organisations which we're leading at the Nuffield Foundation, with the training and development led by Charles Hume and his colleagues at Oxford University, and Oxford University Press producing and delivering the resources, and Jane, who's the Policy and Partnerships Director from OUP, will briefly describe the opportunity that is there for this year. Really delighted that we'll then hear a case study of actual implementation of NELI from this year in a particular primary school, Riders Hayes Primary School, which is in Walsall in the West Midlands. Sally Miner, who's the executive head teacher of that school, and Victoria Day, who's the assistant head for early years, will talk that through. There's also a video about that school's experience, which the OUP produced, and we're going to post that on the www.teachneli.org site. Finally, we're going to be leaving plenty of time for questions, and for this panel we've got Victoria Parks, another Victoria who's the team leader at the DFE's Early Years Quality and Outcomes Division. She's kindly agreed to join us for that. If you want to ask a question to the speakers, the way to do it is you type your question into the Q&A box, not the chat. If your question is directed to a particular speaker, it would really help me if you highlighted that in the question. Now, at the last webinar, we were absolutely bombarded with brilliant questions, and I valiantly failed to get through more than a subset of them. So what we did, as planned, was to harvest and organise them and then work out clear answers to them all. And we're about to post all of that material onto the FAQ page on www.teachneli.org. And so this sort of shameless use of free labour from a webinar was so successful. We're going to do the same thing again, because I'm sure with these numbers we'll have more than we can answer. So please don't hesitate to post questions, and if we don't have time, they will be dealt with and answered properly. And just to anticipate a couple of questions, yes, the slides will be available after the event, and I should also say the webinar is being recorded and will also be available afterwards too. And to anticipate a second question, we are planning on having other webinars. There will be another one that will be very similar to this, also aimed at schools. So please tell your colleagues about this, and we'll also promote it through the usual channels. But if you do get a chance to tell colleagues who weren't able to come today, it's going to be on the 23rd of June, 4 till 5 p.m. So again, once the kids are safely out of the way. Without further ado, I will now hand over to Sarah.
Thanks, Josh. Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Tillotson. I'm from the Education Endowment Foundation, and as Josh said, I'm going to talk about the rationale for NELI, its evidence, and then I'm going to give an overview of what the programme entails on behalf of colleagues at Oxford University. So the bullet points on my slide here, a lot of them have been covered by Josh in his introduction, so I'm just going to briefly cover them. Language skills at 5 are amongst the best predictors of short and long-term educational outcomes. So it's imperative that everybody's working hard to try and make sure as many children are on track in their language development by the end of the early years foundation stage. Success in literacy particularly relies on the development of language skills. And Kate Kane's house model is a really good depiction of that. And it's the image on the right there. You can see the yellow blocks at the bottom are the kind of foundation skills needed for solid reading comprehension, and those skills at the bottom there are all language skills or related to language. So we really need to support language to get really good reading comprehension outcomes. And the reception year is a really key year for targeted intensive support for language. So lots of studies have shown if you assess children's language at 2 years old and you find the children who have or are showing delayed language at that age, about 70% of those children's language needs naturally resolve themselves without any additional intervention by the end of the early years foundation stage. But there's a subset of 30% who continue to have difficulties through school if they don't receive that intervention. So it means that although development of language kind of follows a universal trajectory, within the early years, the milestones or the timing that children reach certain milestones varies between children, but that variability is settled down by the end of reception. And so if we assess children's language skills in reception, and we've got the subset of children who really need that additional target support and early intervention to make sure that they're on the right trajectory for school. And as Josh highlighted, there's lots of preliminary evidence suggesting that there's been an impact of the pandemic on children's language skills. And the Early Years Toolkit, which is a resource produced by the Education Endowment Foundation, highlights that communication and language approaches could have the biggest impact on children's outcomes. So the tool summarises all of the best available high quality evidence internationally on what works to support children's outcomes, and communication and language kind of comes out on top of this list. So it's really important now more than ever that we're supporting children's language in the best way possible. And what is interesting and quite typical about the education evidence base is that we've got lots of evidence about what skills correlate with outcomes and good outcomes, but we have less resources or solutions available for schools where we've got the same level of confidence that if we provide certain things that support staff and children's behaviour change, we've got less solutions available that change staff and children's behaviour in a way that genuinely improves children's outcomes. And that's what's unique about the Nuffield Early Language Intervention. So in the 2000s, the NELI was developed as an evidence-informed, evidence-based programme using some of that knowledge that I shared on the first slide. But over the next decade, so between 2010 and 2020, it went through a series of evaluations which evidence that it genuinely can improve children's outcomes if it's delivered with fidelity. So the study that was published by EEF last summer found that children who received the programme made 3 months of additional progress in their language compared to children who didn't receive the programme. And we have a really good confidence in this outcome because at EEF we have a tool called a padlock rating, and that rates the quality of the evaluation, and it received a 5 padlock rating, which means that we have a lot of confidence that that result happened because of the programme and other variables were quite well controlled. So we think that if people deliver the programme as it was evaluated, they're likely to see that progress in children's outcomes as well. The evaluation also showed that children who received the intervention made 2 months of additional progress in early word reading, and children who have English as additional language benefited from the programme just as much as children who are native English speakers who had a delay. So we think there's a lot of universal support in this programme for children. And recently, the EEF has conducted some evaluation of its evaluations. So it's looked at all of the results within the programmes that it's delivered and evaluated, and found that the Nuffield Early Language Intervention is one of the best programmes that we've delivered for closing the disadvantage gap. So we have a lot of confidence that it's particularly supportive of disadvantaged pupils as well. So because of all of this work over the kind of last 20 years, we can now say it's the most well-evidenced oral language programme available, and we strongly encourage people to take up the offer. So I'm going to quite briefly kind of share what the Nuffield Early Language Intervention is and what it involves. So it's a scripted programme with activities that primarily support children's listening skills, vocabulary development, narrative skills, and early literacy skills, specifically letter sound knowledge and phonological awareness. And as I said, it's a targeted intervention. So it's specifically for children who are showing a significant delay in their language development. It's not for children who have been identified as having developmental language impairment. They need specialist support. They need bespoke programme that a speech and language therapist has developed for them that's particular to their needs. But this is a broader programme of language support that can support children who have a delayed language to kind of give them that extra boost to make sure that they're kind of on track with the whole class in terms of their language. In terms of how it's delivered, it's, as I said, a targeted intervention, so it's for about 4 to 6 children per reception class, and it's an intensive 20-week programme, so it takes about 2/3 of the school year to deliver. There are 3 small group sessions per week, which take about 30 minutes to deliver each, and 2 one-to-one sessions per child per week, which are about 15 minutes long. So it's a really intensive programme, but that's probably one of the reasons why it works. You can see on the chart there on the slide an overview of what the group sessions look like, and the delivery is split between kind of 2 10-week blocks, but doesn't change too much. So the bit that's different across the 10 weeks is within the introduction section. The first 10 weeks involve a listening game, and in the second 10 weeks, those listening activities are swapped with letter sound and phonological awareness activities for just the first 3 minutes of the session. And then after that, vocabulary is focused on for 10 minutes, where key vocabulary is revised and then new vocabulary is introduced. And then there's 10 minutes spent on narrative activities, where the adult often orally tells a story, and the children are encouraged to retell that story or summarise the story or tell their own story kind of linked to that theme. And then the children are praised for their engagement in the session, and kind of an overview of what they've learned that day is provided. And Molly is going to put a link in the chat now, and that link will take you to a section of our website which has videos of those group sessions and one-to-one sessions if you want to see what those look like. In terms of how the training is delivered to deliver the programme to the children, the evaluations involve face-to-face training, but even before the pandemic, we're thinking of, or the team at Oxford were thinking of developing an online training model. That was because an online training model could enable as many schools across the country to receive the programme as possible. And then when social distancing came in, there was even more of a reason to have this online model. The online training utilizes a platform called FutureLearn, and it has 3 linked online courses and a delivery support hub. The 3 online courses will take about 10 to 12 hours to complete, which is kind of similar to 2 full days of training, which is what you'd have received if it was face-to-face. So we encourage people to find time out of class to complete the training as you would if it was face-to-face. The first course is called Language Fundamentals, and that gives people an understanding of how language develops and how you can support it. The second course is called Delivering Nuffield Early Language Intervention, which teaches people the specifics of delivering the small group and one-to-one sessions. And then the third course, we encourage people to take before they reach the 10-week mark of the programme, as that supports people with delivering the phonological awareness and letter sound knowledge aspects. So we want people to complete the first 2 courses before they deliver the programme to children, and the third one can be done a bit later. As well as those things, there's a resource called the Delivery Support Hub on FutureLearn, which has loads of materials, including videos of lots of different children taking part in NELI, resources to support with assessment and your understanding of how to deliver the programme, and involves a forum. So schools can ask questions about delivery and receive support from experts in the programme. The programme has the training programme has no live elements. It has lots of videos, interactive quizzes, and material to read through, and staff can complete that at their own pace. But like I said, we'd recommend schools finding time in the school day out of class to complete the training, as you would if it was a face-to-face session. In terms of who needs to be involved in the programme, it's a reception programme, and it's aimed at children with the lowest levels of language. Because it's such an intensive programme, we want to make sure that the right children are identified and provided with the programme at such a key time in their school lives. So the Oxford University team developed a tool called Language Screen, which is a 10-minute tablet-based screening tool that takes 10 minutes to complete per child. And as part of the kind of funding package that the DfE provided, means that they've provided access to this tool for all of the children in your reception cohort. So you can test all your reception class, as well as the children you think might have particular needs in language. And the assessment tool has 4 subtests. It involves an assessment of expressive language, listening comprehension, receptive language, and sentence repetition. And you can see the output that you received from the programme there on the right. You get a score for each of the subtests and then an overall score. And that's translated into a digestible format with a description and a kind of traffic light system. So we'd recommend that children who are flagged as amber or red receive the Nuffield Early Language Intervention. And in terms of which members of staff should be involved in the programme, in the research trials, the member of staff who delivered NELI to the pupils was the teaching assistant or the early years educator who was linked with the reception class. But if you have another member of staff who specialises in delivering interventions for you, they might be the right person to deliver the programme to pupils. And we require that member of staff to deliver receive all of the 3 online courses. But we also require the reception class teacher to take part in the first course, because that provides them with the understanding of why NELI is important for those children. And we also require the school to nominate a NELI lead, and that's usually a person who is within the senior leadership team, potentially the early years coordinator, who might also be the reception class teacher. And they will kind of monitor the implementation of the programme and kind of help organise things to make sure the programme can happen. So, and we allow that member of staff to opt in to receive the training if they want to, so they can get a good understanding of the programme. Ahead of the webinar, we received quite a few questions from schools who are currently on the current rollout of the programme, so received NELI this academic year, but had some questions about what NELI is going to be like next year. So I've just prepared a slide to answer a few of those questions before we talk about registration to receive, so for new schools to receive the programme next academic year. So there is a list of schools who are currently taking part in NELI on the .gov website, and Molly's going to put that link in the chat if you'd like to look at that. So for schools who are currently delivering the programme to pupils, we all know that COVID has had a significant impact on education this year, and it has impacted our delivery of the programme, with schools closed or predominantly closed in January, February and March. The 20-week programme no longer fitted into this academic year. So we're encouraging schools to continue delivering the programme into the next academic year. So continue delivering to the same children when they're in year 1. So So they're probably going to do about 10 weeks this academic year and then can do the other 10 weeks as they're in year one. But we understand that the adult who's currently trained to deliver NELI might not be able to do that in the next academic year. So if you need additional training for that member of staff, you can contact the person on the email address on the slide there, and they will make sure that you've got a new person enrolled in the training, so you can deliver to those year one pupils. We understand that schools who might have the kit and might have everyone trained up to deliver the program might still kind of want some additional support. So we are going to shortly let schools know by email about what training and support will be available for their next reception cohort. So that information will be coming out shortly. And we understand that for whatever reason, even though a school was registered to receive the programme, they might have not been able to deliver to pupils this academic year. We know of about 3% of the schools who have let us know that they've, for very valid reasons, haven't been able to deliver the programme. But we want to make sure that you can deliver it to your next reception cohort. So contact the email address again on the slide there. Share that you've received the NELI resources but haven't started delivering to pupils yet, and you want some support to access the training so you can do that. So the team will help hook you up with the training this half term, so you can be trained up so you can start delivering to your reception pupils next academic year. I'm going to pass on now to Jane, who's going to talk about how to register your school for NELI if you're new to the programme.
Hi everyone. So to register for NELI, it's a very straightforward process. Schools simply access the teachneli.org portal and register. You need your URN, a NELI lead, who Sarah's talked about. You need to think about how many packs you require, which is normally 1 per class, and you need the head teacher email and their support. Once you're going through the system, you will reach a point where you will be sent a memorandum of understanding outlining the terms and conditions of participation. OUP is offering a support service for schools if you have any problems in signing up, and there's plenty of information, case studies and FAQs on the portal. And the great news is we have over 1,500 schools already signed up, many more in the process. Next slide, please, Sarah. To get a sense of the timeline, the registration is open until the end of July, but we really urge schools to sign up as early as possible to avoid any disappointment. In September, schools that have been invited to enrol on the training and also register for the language screen. And you can complete the training and the language screen assessments anytime in the autumn term after enrolment. OUP will be sending out the NELI packs in November, immediately after half term, so that you have them and it's useful to have them for the online training. And then touch wood, next year schools will have the opportunity to deliver the full 20-week programme from January. In June and July next year, there's an opportunity then to run the language screen review so that you can assess the progress that your pupils have made. Next slide, please. So to support schools, we have a network of advocate schools, all of whom have been successfully using NELI since 2018, and they're very happy to offer expertise and advice. And I'm really delighted that Sally Miner, Executive Head Teacher, and Victoria Day, Assistant Head Teacher at Riders Hayes School in Walsall, who were the first advocate school for NELI, are here to share their experience. But just before they start, and I hand over to them, I wanted to also share the good news that NELI won the Education Resource Awards for special educational needs, which again is further sort of testament to the power of NELI and its impact really on schools. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Sally and Victoria to hear more about NELI from a school's perspective.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you for the opportunity to share our experiences with you. As Jane said, I'm exec head at Riders Hayes now, and also director of operations for one of the new teaching school hubs in the Black Country, Manor Teaching School Hub, and joined by Victoria, who is, as you've heard, our assistant head for early years, but also supports with early years across the region, and he's also an ELE for the local research school, Evidence Lead in Education. So as you've heard, we discovered NELI quite early on around its pilot phase, because we were designing quite a wide-reaching early years language programme as part of a DFE project. And we were very confident to select NELI for that programme as our chosen intervention. And I suppose the why really is, well, why have we been confident in its impact? Well, we ourselves used it with the 47 schools in the project across the Black Country from very, very varying contexts and backgrounds, and have produced the case studies and evaluations, but also from our own experience have seen the remarkable journey that it's taken us on as a school and for our pupils. And this intervention, as you've heard from Sarah, was and is the only recommended EF intervention, and we can certainly vouch for that 3 months plus progress and the very high evidence security. The why, in terms of why are we still doing it nearly 4 years on now from when we first had our training, I think is because we do really believe in it. We've led it from the top, very much part of our priorities as a school with senior leaders. The whole school have, and in the early years team particularly, of course, have been immersed in its principles, and it has ultimately become part of our offer, yes, for the targeted children, but in a wider sense for all children. And that's because we've seen the benefits of extending the impact across the curriculum and throughout the setting, particularly for the targeted children, but for their peers as well. And if we perhaps go to the next slide to talk about how have we embedded NELI then, all colleagues will know, of course, that any intervention needs to be integrated to have maximum effect, and it's that interweaving into the whole class, the quality first teaching, the class teachers being fully au fait with the intervention, the content and the targets that are being set for those individual children, and enabling that revisiting during the day in different contexts that we feel has really helped to embed the programme. So I'm going to ask Victoria to just talk to you a little more about that now.
Thank you, Sally. Hello, everyone. So the how is thinking about the how we make NELI work here at school. So as Sarah's mentioned, we ensure that we provide time for our teaching assistants to have that targeted time with the children in a small group. 3 sessions a week, and also those one-to-one sessions are so valuable. We talk about in the video how, to begin with, we thought that would be a detrimental effect by taking a member of staff out, particularly at the beginning of the year. However, the impact it has is phenomenal. Like we said, it's the power of NELI we've really seen. As Sally was talking about the impact we've seen across the school, to begin with, we started to see the impacts that NELI had on other children by the children from the NELI group talking to their peers about the language from their sessions and the stories, the narratives they've been reading. And we start to see the interest and think, hang on a minute, why aren't we taking this and spreading this wider with all of our children? So that's when we from teachers initially being on the training, is we started to incorporate NELI more explicitly, and it featured more in our planning more than ever before. So we always talk about our target children at planning meetings, but we were more precise in really pinpointing from those one-to-one sessions that our teaching assistants were having with children to really think about, okay, how can we give them additional exposure to really target what they really needed. So that's how it shaped our curriculum, really. NELI has really shaped our curriculum offer here at Riders Hayes, and we really think about those 20 weeks, the themes, the narratives that the children are going to experience, and that's informed our planning. so that we can ensure those children have the opportunities from the NELI group to really immerse them in we really want to think about the transferability of NELI. So we want to give children the real concrete experiences that perhaps they don't always have initially by sitting in a group. We really want to give them that extra dose of language to build their understanding, so they've got the essence and conceptual understanding of this vocabulary. Moving on to the what then, the impact really is, I think NELI, through Sally said, the principles have really strengthened our back and forth interactions that we have now with the children, and I think particularly our targeted children, those children who are in the NELI group. It's strengthened the conversations we have with them, because we can really pinpoint what we need to talk to them about, knowing what their gaps in the elements of language are that Sarah mentioned, that we'd identify from the initial assessments. And the children now feel much more confident to talk about their experiences in a larger group, one-to-one with not just a familiar adult in the NELI group, but the adults also across the classroom. And we know in terms of the new curriculum framework this year, and one of the changes with PSED is about children being able to self-regulate and talk about their emotions. And we feel that through NELI now, we've really seen an impact from that. And yes, we said it has been difficult to deliver NELI this year, but we have still ensured the children remotely have still had that dose. So an example here, following on from the topic where we're talking about body parts, it was one child who was very reluctant initially, and from the screen, who, it was just this week, I came in to tell Sally about it. She had told me she'd fallen over, and she would have fallen over before but dissolved in tears. She came and told me she'd fallen over. She could tell me exactly what part of a body part she'd hurt. She's my ankle, Mrs. Day, it's my ankle. And I said, oh, without saying her name, I said, oh, whereabouts? She said, oh, it's not the outside of my ankle, Mrs. Day, it's the inside of my ankle. And she could tell me about, and that one maybe I won't be able now, I won't be able to move my foot side to side or forwards and back, because that's what your ankle can do. And she actually quickly stopped crying because because it took her mind off it. But it's the fact now of how articulate the children are, how they really have an essence of language, and I think we've really seen the power of NELI, and we've now looked more forensically at our children who would have been in the target group, and we've really seen the impact. And they, like I said, now they're in line with their peers. They are. So we've really seen the gains of NELI.
So in terms of how we'd recommend what you can do best to get the best out of NELI, then again, just to emphasise that drive from SLT and the support that those early years staff need to make sure it's embedded. That time investment for the training, it's really important that everybody's trained, really important that your reception teachers, although they're not delivering it, really get NELI and understand what it's all about, so that they can bring that through the rest of the day, and also that you have that fidelity with the common language, the understanding, and the teachers being able to draw that into their planning. So incorporating that into the daily quality first teaching, both in the adult and the child initiated interactions through the setting up of labs, and those temptations for language are really important. And the other thing that we found as we've gone along is sharing with parents, and don't underestimate the value that parents can bring with NELI too. So modelling those principles, which, as Victoria said, we were doing with parents sitting alongside their children during the pandemic, probably something we'd never have thought of doing before, but working remotely have found new ways of working, so that parents then can copy and can consolidate that vocabulary at home, giving lots more opportunities for repetition and using that language in different contexts. So essentially what we're saying is squeeze every last drop out of your NELI training and those opportunities, and that time investment is worth every minute. Train everybody, and you'll see that it will add so much value, not just for those targeted children, but in fact for their peers too, and the staff, of course. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's great to hear the school perspective, and thank you so much everyone for sticking to time, which is giving us enough. We've had so many questions coming through. We'll have just about time now. I'm just going to knock off a couple of them myself while I can. A few of them are about the actual evidence that sits behind the 3 months progress, which of course is 3 months additional progress, rather than just within the teaching period. And I think rather than try and address those now, we're going to post the EEF report, the evaluation report, which has got a really readable, accessible summary, which explains all of that and explains how what that actually means at 3 months progress. So we'll do that either within the chat here or on the Teach NELI site. The other thing I should say is, again, addressing quite a few of the questions. Once you have NELI, you've got it for life. So you don't need to reapply. You don't need to reapply again for it this year or indeed in subsequent years. Where I want to start with is a cluster of questions which is about going just slightly outside of reception. Quite a few people, Mary James, Karen Cartwright, Duncan DeGrucci have asked about whether the programme can be used for year 1 pupils or even year 2, particularly thinking about the year groups where we've had some missing learning and they might need to sort of consolidate it in the year 1. I'm going to throw that to Sarah to begin with.
Thanks, Josh. So the age group that NELI's been evaluated with is reception. So we have confidence about its impact on that age group. We haven't evaluated it with year 1 or year 2, but we know of schools that are delivering it to that age group. So we know that it's possible, and they're doing that because they think that those children will benefit, and they have seen and feel the benefits as well. So what we'd recommend is using a tool like Language Screen to assess the year 1 pupils you think would benefit, and see if their language needs generally suggest that they're behind enough to receive the programme. There might be some things that you need to amend. For example, the phonological awareness and letter sounds pieces might not be relevant to them, but the content could be. But we wouldn't recommend you taking on the programme to deliver it in year 1. Start with reception first, and then once you've got it delivered to the right age group, you'd have a good understanding of how to implement it with others, perhaps.
And at the other end, we've had a question from Jennifer Martin about whether it could be used with children in the nursery classes attached to primary schools. What about that? So again, NELI has this version, the 20-week version of NELI, hasn't been evaluated with nursery children. So the first of the 3 evaluations actually included some nursery children, but it was a 30-week programme that spanned the end of nursery running into reception. So we do know that there's benefits of supporting children's language in nursery, and we want that to happen, but this version of the programme is not designed for that. And actually, Nuffield are currently funding the Oxford team to develop and evaluate a nursery version that's specifically for that age group. And as I mentioned before, its reception is the year to really have that intensive targeted support. When they're younger than that, a language enrichment approach is better, and so the nursery version should be quite different to reception. So we'd recommend delivering it to reception, but you might think differently once you've delivered it. Sorry to interrupt you on that, Sarah. Sally and Victoria, did you have anything to add to that?
Yes, well, we have trialled using NELI in the summer term in nursery, and we have seen an impact. So we trialled it during the DFE project, didn't we, to see if we could give some of those children an earlier dose and to start the 20-week programme earlier, and we did see some positive results, and also to develop their phonics as well. So it's usually when we introduce grapheme phoneme correspondence and more of that with the children who were ready to. So they did flourish, didn't they, and have a good start, and they did have a good start then when they came into reception.
They did, so we're really interested to hear about the recent work around nursery, and look forward to that.
Please.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And Sarah, sort of related to this, we've had a question from Hayley Powell, who's works in a special educational needs school, saying that quite a lot of her pupils going right up to year 6 are working at expected reception levels. How would it work for them to deliver NELI across those year groups?
So again, the evaluations have been with reception children in mainstream schools. So we haven't evaluated the impact or implementation of NELI in a special school setting, but we know that there's been special children with special needs who've received NELI as part of the original evaluation, and we know that it's based on really solid evidence of how children learn language and can support children with language delays. So there's probably really relevant aspects of the programme for children in a special needs setting. But I think it's really down to the individual school and the pupil's needs about how you choose to adapt the programme for delivery with those children.
Thank you.
We don't have any fuller recommendations on what you should do because it's not been evaluated.
We've got a group of questions which are about group size, actually. So Joe Flanagan has asked, what do you do in a school where you've got more than 4 to 6 pupils who've been screened to benefit from NELI? And it's sort of, again, at the other end, Eleonora Harrison has a school which has got much smaller overall numbers and so would struggle to get a group of 4. What happens if you've got more or less than the 4 to 6 recommended group size?
If language screen highlights say that there's 10 children who are amber or red and need the programme, we would recommend that you should have 2 NELI groups running. We know that this works, and as I said, reception is a really key time for this intervention, so it's kind of worth the effort. I do understand that resources are stretched and that might be very difficult, but because the programme has been provided for free, it frees up your pupil premium spending to potentially provide some adult resources to ensure that you can deliver 2 groups of NELI in that reception class. If the group is smaller, we'd still recommend delivering it to that kind of smaller group. It kind of has, it costs more to deliver to smaller groups of children, but we know that those children will benefit from it. So it's important that they receive it. If there's some children who are kind of just on the edge of being flagged as in need of NELI, include them for some of the programme as well. Perhaps maybe not the one-to-one sessions, but they would be good to include in the group sessions, and they would be really good role models for language for the other children.
Thank you. Mandy Robinson has asked whether it's possible to start accessing the training earlier than September.
Yeah, unfortunately not. So obviously the training is running now and is accessible to the current cohort of schools, but we need to set up their training again for people new to the programme, and that's going to start being offered from mid-September. So unfortunately we can't offer it any sooner.
Thanks, that's fair enough. There's a question from Claire Baxter, which I'm going to ask. Sorry, Sarah, you're going to get the bulk of these questions, but I'm also going to try and get Sally and Victoria's perspective on this, which is, do the teaching assistants do the training in their free time, or do they do it within school time? Are there any, what's the expectations on that?
Shall I go first?
Yeah, you go first, and then I want to hear how it was actually implemented by Sally and Victoria.
Yeah, so with the online training model, it's accessible 24 hours whenever you want. So there is actually potential for people to complete it in their free time, but that's a decision for the school to make about when they want to want people to access the training. If it was a face-to-face model, the timing would be during the school day, and people would be needed to be given time, release time to complete the training. And we know that people digest training better when they're kind of focused on it. So we would recommend encouraging schools to provide time during the school day for out of class time to take part in the training. So it could be that you have an inset day and plan to do the training on that day if you don't want it to impact pupils, perhaps. But we wouldn't necessarily, we let schools choose when they want to access the training, really.
So, Sally and Victoria, can you tell how it worked in your school?
Yes, certainly. Well, at the time the training was delivered here, it was face-to-face. The training is more intense for the teaching assistants in that way, but there was time given in the face-to-face training also for TAs to get really familiar with the materials and to prepare a lot of the materials. And I think that's what we were referring to in terms of this being driven and given priority by SLT, so that I think to give that time in the school day is quite important to show the value that school are putting on it. And in practice, I think you'll find that TAs are feel very valued to be given that time, and then the buy-in from them really reaps rewards, because certainly our TAs were taking the resources home and wanting to make the best of that, and to go back through material. So I think if you can find a halfway house where you're actually giving some time, you'll get some back as well.
One thing I do know anecdotally is that some schools have been encouraging TAs to sit together and do the training, you know, even though it's online, in a room together, so they can share their experiences as they go along. So I'm going to chuck another one back at you, which is about speech and language therapists. Can those SLTs who are supporting their local NELI networks use the training themselves?
So we're currently looking at that. We want to make sure that the local teams, so local authority teams or speech and language therapists who are working with schools have the knowledge of NELI, particularly speech and language therapists who can really support schools with understanding which children, once they've done the language screen, should be selected to complete NELI, and support around those decision-making about if someone has an identified need for language, should they do NELI as well as their bespoke programme. So we're looking at trying to offer training to local authority leads and speech and language therapies, and we'll provide more information on Teach NELI about that when we've kind of organised how to sign up for it.
Thank you. And there's a question from Joe Flanagan, who asks, are there whole class QFT strategies for the teacher to use in the classroom to embed skills learned in the withdrawal sessions?
So there isn't explicit things included in the programme, but that's resources that we're trying to build on the Teach NELI Delivery Support Hub.
No, that's helpful. Becky Herbert has asked just to clarification on the timeline, and I think it's helpful for us to just reinforce that about how schools carried out. Can we confirm to that in the autumn term, that's when the assessments take place, the training takes place. When do the assessments take place? So the assessments need to be completed before starting the programme, and because the programme is 20 weeks, we recommend that you start the programme after Christmas, so that you've got a really good stretch of time to deliver that programme. There's more than 20 weeks between Christmas and July, but you always probably need a bit of buffer, and there's things like trips and things like that. So Becky, I mean, I guess she's asking, can you start early? If you've got on the case, you've done the training quite quickly, and you've got the assessments in, can you start before Christmas? Yeah,
and that's why we're trying to give everyone everything they need as early as possible. So giving access to the training and access to the language screen in early September, so people can fit it in and choose when they want to do it. And if you're ready, start. But the resources come in November, so that's the kind of point when you can start with the children. But the other bits could be started before.
Right. Okay. No, that's clear. Anna Pryor has asked about children who have particularly specific language delay needs at the more sort of extreme end. Is the programme at all suitable for them? How do they get flagged by the language assessment tool?
So they will be flagged in the language screen tool. They'll be marked probably as amber or red if they've got specific needs. And actually, because it's got those 4 subtests, you'll see where their weaknesses really lie. So if they've got a receptive language impairment, you'll probably see that their score will be really low in that area, and then probably their total and maybe the other areas will be impacted as well. And I think it's that kind of spiky profile which kind of highlights if a children has an explicit specific deficit. So that might be if they haven't already been identified as having that need, that's a really good time point to have a conversation with a speech and language therapist. Because they're flagged as kind of being suitable to take part in NELI, they can and they will benefit. But because we know that there's children who are already on speech and language therapy programs, are already having out of class time to receive them, it's up to the school to decide if having their bespoke program plus their NELI program will be kind of too much time out of class and they'll be missing too much. And we want to make sure, I'm sure every school wants to make sure that children have kind of a balanced curriculum. So there needs to be careful consideration about what they're missing if they're kind of receiving that double dose of intervention. So I'd recommend people have a conversation with their speech therapist who comes to their school about which children to include in the programme, and particularly whether to include children with specific identified needs in language.
And another interesting population, this is raised by Christine Hessian, is about children who arrive in the country with English as an additional language and speak or who speak very little English. Can the programme be used for them?
Yes, what we saw from the evaluation that children with additional who speak English as an additional language benefited just as much from children who have who are native English speakers who have language delay. So whoever the EEL children could be easily flagged by Language Screen as being good for the programme, and we would recommend that they receive it.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to Sally and Victoria on a question which comes from Vanessa Levy, which is about whether the teaching assistants who work on a programme need more time during the week to plan, assess, write up sessions and so on. I mean, can you give us a sense from your school, which may not be typical, but how long each week are they roughly out of class?
Yep, certainly.
They're roughly out of class, so it's the sessions. So they have the 3 sessions a week, and then as Sarah said, it depends on whether the children need the one-to-one sessions. And actually, for some children, we could take those one-to-one sessions into the continuous provision, or take them out, particularly to look back at the narrative as part of their story time. So we find that it's obviously 3 sessions a week they're out, the 3 20-minute sessions, and it varies depending on what we're working on for the additional sessions. In terms of planning and preparation, this is really comprehensive, the programme, and you can pick up the book and go with it following the training, and that's what our team would say here. Our teaching assistants are given additional time, not just for NELI, it's part of their planning, because we see their integral part they play as key workers across the setting to look at their observations and to track and to assess, and so they are given additional time. But on top of NELI, that's incorporated into their time. Sally, isn't it?
It is, yes, and I mean that very much fits with the MITRE research, doesn't it? The maximising impact of teaching assistants, and it's that feedback and that communication between the TA and the teacher that do make a difference. So that's a sort of whole school policy here anyway.
Right, I'm going to just do 2 more questions because we're just about to run out of time. One really quick answer from Sarah, hopefully, on whether a local authority advisors, this is a question from Catherine Brereton, whether a local authority advisor supporting schools using NELI is able to access Future Learn training. Is it the same answer as speech language?
Same answer as SALT teams, yeah. We're looking into that and hopefully going to do that, and there'll be information on Teach NELI when we've kind of finalised the approach for it.
Okay, that's great. And the last question, I'm going to put Victoria Parks from DFE on the spot on this one, which is a question from Joe Flanagan. Do the DFE aggregate the data across the country in terms of children's language skills from the language screen before and after the intervention? And related to that, will local authorities be able to see an anonymised report for their area?
So quick answer, no, we don't get the data to aggregate it across the country from Language Screen, and I'm really happy to take away the suggestion for Language Screen and feed that back, that they could perhaps in some way do if they could have local authorities sign up, get some kind of anonymised report for their LA. But again, that's something that Language Screen team would need to look at. It's not a DFE thing.
Thanks very much. Well, we've come to the end. I'm actually quite proud of the bunch of us for burning through such an enormous number of questions, and there are still some to be answered, but As I say, we're going to collate those and address the ones that we've just currently done with a little bit more nuance and detail on the FAQ site. Thank you very much, and thank you particularly to Sarah, who deserves a triple gin and tonic and a lie down for taking the bulk of the questions. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. It's been a great session, very interactive, and it's been particularly good to hear from a school about the actual implementation of it, and wonderful questions from everyone, which have really got us thinking as well about some of the developments that we might make in the next couple of months to the programme. So I'm going to wind things up now, but thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.